So hello listeners and welcome to my channel, Lana the Educator. Of course, I am your host, Lana the Educator. If you're a first-time listener on this channel, welcome. Here we explore the latest educational trends and tackle pressing issues facing the education sector. Of course, we also conduct insightful interviews with people making a difference, and we share stories of triumph and innovation from classrooms around the globe. So if you're interested in all of this, then this is the place for you. Today, we are joined by an exceptional artist and curator, a creative force whose work spans painting, sculpture, installation, and urban design. Born in Brooklyn, New York, and raised in Port of Spain, Trinidad and Tobago, his artistic practice explores social art, spatial relationships, and the interplay between natural ecologies and urban environments. With a Bachelor of Arts honors from Goldsmiths, University of London, and a Master of Arts in City Design from the Royal College of Art, he earned the prestigious Frank Bowling Scholarship and brings a multidisciplinary approach to art, questioning materiality, cultural narratives, and social structures. He is also the founder of the Sankofa Projects, a curatorial initiative that emerged from his RCA fellowship. Through the Sankofa Archive, he is documenting the collective history of Black practitioners at the college, creating a dynamic space for research, collaboration, and dialogue. His work has been showcased internationally from London's Chile Art Projects and Dada Gallery to Milan Design Week, solidifying his place in contemporary art discourse. He has also engaged in conversations at institutions such as the Royal College of Art, Young Space, and Studio Chapelle, fostering critical discussions on art, design, and spatial intervention. Today, we will explore his journey, the inspiration behind his work, and the impact of his projects. Let's welcome Bryant Van Low. Welcome, Bryant.
Thank you for such an introduction. I'm looking forward to having this conversation
Yeah.
and talking about the projects. You
Yeah,
know,
I'm looking forward to it as well. Very interesting. I mean, I want to ask you because when you were, when I knew you, you were in a
yeah,
completely different field. So how did you end
yeah,
up in art? Right?
yeah. I think when I reflect on it, um, as you know, starting from a business background from the secondary level and then going off to study entrepreneurship
Mhm.
at Goldsmiths. I think the entry point for me into art, I would say, is Goldsmiths as like an institution.
Mhm.
Um, Historically, is an art school as well, but
Okay.
they also offer business, and now they even offer law and design. So they do have that cultural history of art, especially during like the 70s and 80s. Um, YBA movement in London. So going into Goldsmiths, um, I was immediately put into an environment of art. So it was a lot of going to galleries every Thursday, popping my head into shows. Also, where it's situated is in Southeast London, where um, at the time and even currently, there's lots of emerging and small galleries in and around. So I would always just out of curiosity would visit. So I feel like that was for me, that was the beginning. At that time, those 3 years, which was 2018 to 2021, I didn't actually produce work. I wasn't physically making work, but I was thinking about it. So, you know, I feel like even if you're not producing work physically, you're still practicing or, learning and gathering the tools to eventually make that work that you're thinking about. So I feel like that's how I got into it. Um,
But I
yeah,
could say, I mean, I go to a lot of art shows. I
yeah,
I see art. I didn't end up in art. You don't a lot of people say they dabble in art.
yeah.
So what was the uh the pivot point then into actually producing
Mhm.
work after
Um,
painting? Mhm.
Pivot point was COVID.
Mhm.
So in my third year,
Mhm.
oh, okay, I've skipped the point. The pivot point was when I did a curatorial project with two
Mhm.
friends,
Mhm.
and in my first year at university, and we basically curated an exhibition of seven artists. So that was, I would say, my first step into actively engaging in art and attempting to be a part of the scene. Um, so the pivot point started there from a curatorial space.
Mhm.
And then it evolved into in my third year when I made in my dorm room,
Mhm.
which is like basically a box, it's very small.
Yeah.
I made a just out of necessity. I think, just to express an idea physically.
Mhm.
I made a sculpture, a concrete sculpture.
Mhm.
Um, that was never shown. It didn't really show anybody. It was just personally for me to get an idea out. Um, and I also made some drawings of like chairs and like lines and just compositions. Um, put that away. COVID happened, and I moved back to Trinidad in my third year. As many people did,
Mhm.
and I'm and that's when I started painting. Was when I was in Trinidad.
But
Um,
was this at this stage self-taught? Because you're saying your third year, but
yes,
were you studying art?
yes.
You were not studying art.
I was not studying art, but I
So
was
a lot of this
looking,
is self-taught.
yeah, yeah. I was
Okay.
looking at a lot of art,
Mm-hmm.
and I think yeah. So I wasn't formally taught painting. Um, the you know the education came through um very much going to shows and talking and having friend and being friends with artists, being in proximity
Mm-hmm.
to artists. So I think just through osmosis, like I was just picking up, and trying to find an entry point, you know, into into the art community. Um, and yeah, so from that when I started and I did my first painting, um, it was very much for me, it wasn't to be like to be shared, um, which I think is a good um, it's an organic way of making work, versus making it and immediately putting it on social media. It was, really just for expression, especially during that COVID time where, you're kind of inside and you're trying to figure out next steps. Um, so painting afforded me next steps, I would say.
You ended up with a master's in
In city
city
design,
design. What? Yeah.
yeah. So along with the interest in painting, um, and the interest in art, along with the interest in painting and the interest in art. Um, One of the reasons that got me also, addition that got me into painting was, architecture
Mhm.
and spatial practices, but like urban design and architecture. So, for me, that was my entry point, kind of, looking around and seeing space as kind of like an assemblage of elements, which to me is painting. It's each additional mark produces a picture, and I think that's the relationship between kind of for me painting and architecture, and it's one of the reasons why I decided to go down um, the urban design route, um, and study at RCA. Um, so it wasn't direct, it was very much and continues to still be very much a journey, and yeah.
So what kind of artist would you say you are? And what medium do you prefer to use?
um I would say I'm a painter.
Mhm.
I'm a painter.
Mhm.
um, and curator.
Right.
So the medium, my favorite medium is painting. You
Right.
know, it's the medium I get the most enjoyment from,
Mhm.
just from pure enjoyment. And it seems to always, carry me through,
Mhm.
you know, to that next step, even when you feel like, so you don't have a show going, or you don't have a residency on, or this and that. Painting affords you, uh, it puts you into a different, it affords you the ability for yourself to be put into a different space just through an immediate action.
Mhm.
Um, and I think that is why I love painting, because it affords you freedom and a future. Um, yeah,
You also wear the hat of art curator, and you've mentioned it. You describe yourself as a painter and a curator. So
yeah,
I think you talked a bit about how you got into the curation.
yeah,
I know that is what was your pivot point that
yeah.
sparked that kind of passion. But for people who don't understand or the role of a curator, how would you
Mhm,
describe that to someone who is unfamiliar with that profession?
mhm.
Hmm.
I was talking about this the other day. I
Hmm.
feel like there's the formal, definition of curation as, the organization and so on. But
Hmm.
I know I approach curation as, think of it as like a community-led project.
Hmm.
It's like being a community organizer almost, you know?
Hmm.
So, you have your program, you have a mission, and then you have your methods of engagement to
Hmm.
activate the mission. And then a lot of curation, for me, the part of curation that I like is curation being in physical space, being in real space,
Hmm.
taking up space, trying to, activate, having a talk in a gallery, or having a talk in a certain type of architecture, with a certain with selected speakers, and then creating a moment for people to engage. So that's the part of curation that I feel is important. And versus just having an exhibition and just leaving it, you want people to really take something from it. Um, and yeah, so community led, and that's what I'm trying to do through the Sankofa project is that community focused programming. Yeah,
Yeah, and I'm going to come to that very soon. But what
yeah,
goes into selecting and organizing the artworks for exhibition?
yeah. Um, I've never done an exhibition, but you know, for the project, my
Right.
main focus for
Mm-hmm.
the first three projects
Mm-hmm.
was producing an oral history.
Okay.
You know, because I found that, like, especially in London, like this exhibitions,
Mm-hmm.
so many exhibitions, and I found that I wanted to critically get people to critically engage versus just come to a show, you know, talk a little bit and then never go back to the show again.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted critical engagement. So the decision was to do oral history, start with oral history. So
Alongside actual pieces, or simply the art was the storytelling? What was it
yeah,
like?
it's just conversations with artists,
Oh.
um, and the selection of artists was, like, with current alumni of the RCA,
Mm-hmm.
and people adjacent to RCA as well.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
So
That's interesting
and
though, because
the people that I've had
uh,
conversations with.
did you record? Was it a record? I'm trying to conceptualize what it would look like, because when we
Yeah,
think of curation and you're doing an exhibition, you would think of, okay, we're going and we see these pieces and there's a theme there. So to hear that it was something oral is new
yeah,
to me as somebody who just observes art and not produce art.
yeah,
So was it a recording of
yeah,
the conversation that was being told that went into an archive or something like that? How was it?
yeah, yeah, exactly,
Oh,
exactly.
okay.
So that was the output
Mm.
of the project of
I
that,
saw.
I say it gets people, to engage,
Mhm.
on a deeper level when you have the visual, textual, and then also voice, like you have recordings and you're able to kind of, engage, on a deep level. And I personally love those type of exhibitions, you usually see them in museums and that kind of thing.
Right.
Those kind of
Yes.
yeah,
And I found it was really interesting because I think even us, it may not be novel in your field, but it's novel for us who only look at art in one way, which is, you sculpt or you build or you paint is what we know
yeah,
it as, not necessarily voices and storytelling, but I guess we're moving into the future and that would be, pretty interesting
yeah.
to hear. So we've been mentioning a lot the Sankofa
Mhm.
archive, the Sankofa project. And what does that name mean? What does it come from?
So Sankofa
Mm.
is it means to go back, to go forward. So
Um,
it's to look towards look at the past, to look towards your future.
okay, I'm
Um,
gonna interrupt because that's unless I'm really ashamed because I'm English is my field and I've
yeah,
not heard the word used in that way to describe. We might say
yeah,
introspect or an introspective. So where
yeah.
does it come from? Is it I don't know, an indigenous word? What language? I don't know,
It's
French. I don't know. What is it?
it's African phrase.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
and I found out about it. This when you look up Sankofa, you would
Mm,
see lots of archives and
mm.
museums and books about the word Sankofa.
Okay.
And I just and it also came from you know an exhibition that I did with RCA.
Mm-hmm.
And RCA has this long history of artists, and especially Black artists, who
Mm-hmm.
come to the institution. And a colleague of mine, Emily Moore,
Mm-hmm.
she decided a year or two ago to do a exhibition called Sankofa,
Mm-hmm.
and it basically reached into the archive
Mm-hmm.
of RCA's collection and worked with current students who are currently enrolled at the institution. So um, and she basically curated the exhibition,
Mm-hmm.
and it had work from Emily Moore, Crystal Feely, who lives and works in Trinidad
Mm-hmm.
as well. Um, I was in it, and then a few others were in it as well. Shannon Boone, there was a few others in it as well. And so that was my entry point for learning about Sankofa as a phrase and as a concept and a methodology. And so I just felt like it was natural to name the project Sankofa archive. Yeah,
Yeah, and just to clarify, RC for the listeners is the Royal College of Art that he's
yeah,
referencing, right?
yeah.
And well, I read that you're looking to document, you said, the collective history of Black practitioners at the Royal College of Art. So why was that? Why was this purpose or aim so
Mhm,
necessary? What was the impact you hope that
mhm.
it would have?
So it was necessary because you know the institution has been around for a while,
Mm-hmm.
and there's so much history, but you know it's I would there wasn't a centralized place for people to see it,
Mm-hmm.
um and for people to to look and critically and have lots of information on it, so to have like recordings and conversations and things outside of just seeing an image on a screen, right?
Right.
So the the project, I think, was necessary because there was a lot there was so much information and images and visuals that you know you need a something to centralize it, just to distill it down. um and yeah, and so it's also the collections is, I wouldn't say public facing. It's something that if you're in the school, you can go and visit.
Okay.
So the project brought history forward, publicly facing. So it's like, like, let's talk about it. you know that kind of um yeah, let's have that conversation publicly. And yeah,
So let's talk a little bit about your own
mm,
art. Um,
yeah,
I think when I encountered you, I don't know, maybe it's maybe it's when I encountered you and I looked on the Instagram and we asked you, you would say burlap. And it was like,
yeah,
that's caucus back from
yeah,
Trinidad.
yeah,
So
yeah,
I mean, which is good, right? Which
yeah,
is
yeah, yeah, yeah.
interesting. But so how did, if any, growing up in
Mhm.
both Brooklyn, New York, and Port of Spring, Trinidad, how did these environments help to shape, your
Yeah.
your artistic tastes and those interests?
I think I think you talk about the burlap, and
Mm,
then you mention Trinidad, and you mentioned Brooklyn, and this is that, right?
yeah.
You know, I was trying to think about material, a way to represent, labor and movement and, that kind of, diaspora.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think that's the story of a lot of people who live, especially in Trinidad. Like Trinidad is a country of migration, of
Right.
of constant migration, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, the burlap was like my way of like looking for a material to to start, because for me, like working on a store-bought canvas, like personally, there was no, like it didn't really move me, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So the material was a lens for to kind of like talk about, you know, migration, because it was a material that was used for movement of
Mm-hmm.
um of commodities, which
Mm-hmm.
is, a central part of the history of the Caribbean,
Right.
and it's a big reason why people end up here, living here in the
Mm-hmm.
first place. So um yeah, it was a way of, finding my creating my visual language as an artist, so material, and then that's the starting point, and then you can start painting on it. And then when you start painting on it, I think for me it's really just about painting, you know? So have the material, and then I start painting on it, and then that becomes just about painting and composition, and and
So
becomes it's very free.
materiality plays a major role in your, I think what you do with your art.
Yeah,
So, and of course, well, the one I've seen is the burlap caucus bag
yeah.
for us in the Caribbean.
Struck it.
How do
Yeah,
you choose the material? Is that your sole, base or your main go-to material,
yeah,
for your art? And yeah,
yeah. It was
for that,
for about 2 years,
right?
and then about 6 months ago, I
Mm-hmm.
was like, you get tired, you feel like it's time to work with a new material. So now I'm working on wood.
Ah,
I'm working on wood panel,
right,
um that I get it made here.
right.
So I go down to the frame shop.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I give them dimensions, and we make a wood panel, and now that is my starting point for a painting. It's very common. People use wood panel all the time,
Yeah, yeah.
but it's also, it's nice. It's nice to paint on as well.
Mm.
So I think it was just like fatigue. I was like, oh, like, I feel like working. I don't feel like working on, but it's also a very hard material to work with.
Right.
So, but what I would say though is, you know, it got it got people to understand, what I was thinking. So, just making the decision to work with solely that material for a period of time. Like for me, it was, it did what it needed to do. Maybe I'll
Yeah.
revisit,
Yeah. I
you
think if
know.
you're creative too, you're constantly creating and you're evolving. So after a
Yeah,
while, something new must have come up for you to do
yeah,
with this, unless you go into producing clothes out of the burlap bags or something like
yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah. And,
Right.
I- and
And
I'm
who
and I'm
know, you
sure.
might end up combining the two materials, the burlap with the wood, and
Yeah,
more creation will come out. So I think if you're creative,
yeah.
that will actually happen.
It's also for the viewer as well. I'm sure people are like, oh God, he's painting on burlap. Yeah.
Again.
Again. So it's like, you need to keep people engaged as well, You need to do something new. You need to experiment. You need to experiment, you know. experiment of material, experiment with scale, So before actually, I mentioned, but before I was working on, I was really only painting on kind of 1 meter by 1 meter
Okay.
um stretches.
Hmm.
So now I'm actually working small. I'm working on just like 12 by 12, 12 inches by 12 inches wood panel,
Okay.
trying to see, trying to see if I could produce something at a small scale. Like I don't need, doesn't need to be at this large scale, massive painting. So right now I'm producing small works, just a collection of a lot of small works.
No
So yeah,
artist exists without criticism and critique. So, what
it's the
has been
most
your
important.
experience? What has been your experience with that? How does your work, how do you respond to critique?
Yeah, I think critique is the most important
Mm.
um thing, especially if you're designing art, making art, writing,
Mm.
you know. But once the critique is carries you forward, like some people are doing critique and it's coming from a place of like, you know, anger and this is that.
Maliciousness is not,
You don't
as we say,
listen to the yeah,
constructive.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's not constructive, right? Um, but you know, and I think everyone experiences this in art school. Like
Right.
you make, especially in architecture,
Wow.
if you go to architecture is notorious for, kind of very serious critique, having very serious crits, you know.
Mm.
So, but what it does though is it makes you think, it gives you distance between you and your work, It makes you think about what you're doing,
Mm.
on an elemental level, like why should this work exist? Like
Mm.
after, yeah, why should it exist? And it also makes you understand your work. So answer your question, I'll say critique is the most important thing.
Mhm.
And your critique can come from, your trusted, your friends.
Mhm.
And I think that's usually the best critique. Because you show sometimes you show your friends work and they're like, nah, like it's just like this isn't it. But once there's a rationale, I think it's the
Okay.
most important thing. And then there's also self criticism as well. Like sometimes you paint something, you write something, you put it away for a week, and you look at it and you say, oh, well, I think, the color is a bit off and the material is off and this and this and that. And then usually you produce something better, you know? Um,
Self-criticism is sometimes the worst criticism.
yeah,
Because
yeah,
people will say, what are you seeing? What are you complaining about? It's good.
yeah. But there's also element of, you need to develop your sensibility
Mhm.
towards your own work
All
and
right.
towards what you're doing. So like you need to, some artists advise against it, but you need to look at as much work as possible. Like watch films, look at paintings,
Mm.
try and emulate your favorite, try to emulate your favorite painting. It wouldn't come out the same, but it's gonna come out something. It's usually gonna come out on something that you like.
Mhm.
There's this artist, actually one of my favorite artists, called Oliver Barrington,
Mhm.
and he's born in New York, and he's Venezuelan, and bit of Caribbean, and he had this show a few years ago where called Artists I Steal From. Title of the show is Art. It was called Artists I Steal From,
Right.
and he basically made kind of like work from groups of works from artists that he loved, and I think that as a concept is quite interesting. It's like,
Right.
you don't need to hide your references. Like all, this type of work that we do is, including itself, like is inherited, right? Like
Right.
it's something that's inherited. So I don't think you should always show your references and try and emulate people that you like, and then through that process you find your style. Like you find your own personal style. And then people younger than you or older than you will try and emulate you. So it's just like,
Right.
yeah, it's just like a cycle.
Right. And it might not be in your lifetime too. Sometimes it's not even
Yeah.
in your lifetime that you read and you
Usually,
see, you
yeah,
know.
usually it's not, usually, people are still making paintings and works from people who from, 50, 60 years ago, 70
Right.
years ago. It's
And
still
centuries ago sometimes, centuries,
centuries ago.
centuries, yeah.
And I think that's quite nice though,
Yeah.
you know.
So are we able to see any of your work here locally? Where can we go in Trinidad and Tobago and see, something from Bryant?
I'm I'm so currently not at the moment,
Right,
but I'm talking to just friends,
right.
like a curator here as well,
Mhm.
and we're trying to get I would love to show work here, I would
We
show a few
come, we
paints.
come, we come and
Yeah,
see.
yeah, yeah,
May not be able to
yeah.
afford it, but we'll come and see.
But
But as talking about
yeah,
as a curator, you're pretty, if not young, you look young. So what challenges do you face, approaching people and as a curator and a young one at that?
yeah, I think it's like it's space, right? It's trying to find like physical spaces, like trying to find um spaces to hold your conversations and so on. But what I found is helpful for that is just working with your friends,
Right.
is working with your friends, and then as a community, you
Mhm.
you will figure it out. I think it's important. It is of course important to show your work in
Right.
kind of like the white cube, quintessential gallery. I think sometimes it's important because it gives you a surgical view of painting. It's just paint about art or sculpture or whatever. But I'm very, very open to, work that's outside of the gallery where you can kind
Mhm.
of recontextualize spaces, um, and show in a certain type of architecture. I think that's the coolest exhibitions
Right.
always. It's never the, cube, white cube. They call, the white cube space.
Mhm.
Um,
Well, artists
so,
subjective, so
CIC.
so that's some people's taste. And it's what
Yeah,
they're
yeah, yeah, yeah,
used
yeah.
to, traditional things. It's hard to get people to come out of their comfort zone sometimes and what they are used
Yeah,
to seeing and doing, comfortable thing. But then art can also be disruptive and people as well like that, to
yeah,
reflect their life.
yeah.
And as I'm on that point, I know as I keep saying that I think what you're doing and the way that you're approaching it is, I might say novel here as a novice, but artists might say, no, this has been done before, but it's new to me. And with the rise of, digital media and all of that, how do you see the future of art and art curation evolving?
Hmm. So how
Because
do
you
I see the
yourself on
future?
Instagram, you
Yeah,
yourself on, the current digital media things, TikTok and all of that have
yeah,
changed the way that people engage with art.
yeah.
So with that, how would you see, art and art curation evolving
I
in
think,
your field?
I think it's so amazing. Like you could literally make work now. The kid in Trinidad, the kid who lives in Tobago, Barbados, or kind of live in places where it's not the center of the art world, where it's like New York, London, Japan, and so on. Being an artist, being a designer in 2025, um, is very is a very rare. So I'm just getting my display right. It's very rare time in history because you're now able to produce something and share it with the world.
Right,
So you could be making you could be making something in Trinidad right now, share it on Instagram, and it can be picked up by the community that you're looking for. Um, so outside of, obviously there's advantages of being in the city or being in, the physical space because, it puts you into a scene, people need to see and shake your hand, but um you don't need to, you know. So I think, having, a website, being active on social media, and I mean, we've seen it. People are now have full careers from, TikTok,
Right.
like, like I'm personally still wrapping my head around that, the
Right.
people, the idea of, content creators and so on, um, but it's just an example of, what, digital space can do and how that can translate into a real career. It's very real, you know. Now I think, for example, Instagram
Mhm.
is like the modern website. Lots of people don't even have websites anymore. They just have Instagram,
Right.
you know, and it's just um and now TikTok. Um so um yeah, I think, that digital element has, completely changed people's career trajectories, and you're also able to connect with your community,
Right.
you know, and really, curate a community if you use it, properly. Um, and just try and be in the scene. Yeah.
Because I like that sometimes you can actually watch the artists like in real time. You're seeing the process, not just
Yeah.
the from on social media, not just the finished product that you see them doing it. And a lot of people are using their spaces, like they're going out into the city and they're doing stuff on the pavement, or they're
Yeah.
using metal or whatever it is they're using. So that is
Yeah.
an interesting take to see on, because not everybody is going to be, I don't know, Van Gogh.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's Van Gogh an artist, I don't know, Picasso, or
Yeah.
everybody
Yeah.
for you to see. So it's nice that people are using social media to do
Yeah.
their art.
People, what you learn about social media is that people are very creative,
Right.
and everyone is extremely talented,
Mhm. Mhm.
and there's so much talent, you know, I scroll down Instagram for 2 minutes, and
Mhm.
I see um works that I've never imagined or seen before. But I think it's also, as a, somebody who makes things, like, you have to be balanced, because you don't want to look at too much
Right.
things, because sometimes it offsets, your thinking. And so it's kind of having the balance between um using social media and not using social media. I tend to not use it when I'm making stuff, because I don't want to accidentally, subconsciously just make something that I saw. Or so it's the balance. It's the balance.
So how would you describe or explain what socially engaging artwork means or is?
I would say, um socially engaging artwork. It depends, like some work, you know, is obviously political. Like, it's
Mm.
obviously, you know, socially focused, and
Mhm.
then some work, and you see it a lot, especially in like abstract works, abstract painting. Um, Sometimes it's very political, but it takes, you have to read it, to do a deep reading of it, to to understand the social political goal, um or element. Um, but I think for me, I don't think my work is like very political. It's not political. Yeah, it's not political. But um I think maybe the burlap works were more, had more of, so like, you know, trying to talk about labor and migration through
Okay.
material and so on.
Okay.
Um, and these newer works are more about painting, you
Mhm.
know, um, and composition. Right now, not to go off topic, but like, like the new works are more um just looking at the landscape, especially we live in Trinidad, and like,
Mhm.
where I live here, I'm literally surrounded by mountains, and
Mhm.
you know, the beach is not far, and it's just like so much, beauty and like color. So, these new works, I'm trying to like show that. Um, that thing that I always tell people when I go to London is like, oh, it's so beautiful in Trinidad and this and that. So I'm trying to I'm just trying to use more color.
Why I like to have persons like you on my podcast is to show that you may have started off with one idea or one
Yeah.
career in mind or one, content area that you're studying and you end up in something else that you don't expect to be
Yeah.
in. And what was your parents' response to this? From
Yeah.
business school to art school, that's that sort of
Yeah.
thing. So anything you would message or thing you would like to say to
I think
listeners?
I think, just talking about art, say like you're studying business and you would like to do something creative, whether it's photography, painting, curation, writing, so on. I think it's important to understand like because every career has a structure. If
Mm,
like has a structure and a system. Um and it's understanding the how your field functions. So understanding, the academic side, understanding, you know, there's residencies and the industry and the financial content. So what I did actually, a
mm,
good example is like before I always make schematics. So if you're making a work, it's important for me personally to make a schematic to understand like the macro sense. So if you're getting into a field,
mm,
um, sit down, make a schematic, understand the wider picture, and then you're able to kind of find an entry point for you, you
mm,
know? Um, and then you realize that, like there's a system to it, there's a way of doing it, and you could do it. And just to lean into your interest, like it's not gonna not work out. Like once you do it organically and it's true, usually it works out. It might take a long time, but it works out. And you find yourself suddenly within a community of people that support you as well.
mm,
Um, and and even I say that, but art also has the stereotype of being a very cutthroat, you know, difficult field, and it is,
mm,
but there's always a community for you within in that. And I think that goes across all fields though.
mm, mm.
It's never going to be like an easy path, but you need to have friends and kind of create a family,
Mm.
try to create some sort of community in whatever you do. Yeah.
Right. And with that, I like my listeners to know that you empower minds and you ignite curiosity. We would like my listeners to join me in thanking Bryant Van Low for joining us here on Lana the Educator.